now. I think it's recording. All right,
I think
cool.
it's
Let's kick
recording.
it
That's
off.
how literally every one of these is going to start, Tom. It's gonna be, I think
this is recording, yeah.
All right, so welcome to Uncode Fridays. Hope everybody had a more restful week than last week. It was pretty ridiculous last week. So the way that these work, just so we're on the same page, we're just gonna go down the line. Everybody gives a really brief, like, here's who I am, what I'm interested in, or if you want to talk about something today, you're welcome to pitch that, if you will. I will say that I have a phone a friend pitch that I know is coming in. So Nikki is going to be joining us halfway through, and I know she wants to talk about state management. So I know Mike and I had on a previous call discussed potential state management. So anything to do with state management, let's leave that till after Nikki gets here, because I know she wants to be in that conversation. So I'm Bryan Ollendyke, or BTO Pro on the Twitter webs. We do a lot with web components. I work at Penn State. Today I don't have anything specifically in mind to talk about, other than I want to talk about state management, kind of look at some different approaches that we've been using to doing it, and specifically see some of the ways Nikki's doing it in the video player, because I'm not familiar with those.
I'm Eric Itala. I work for the Office of Undergraduate Education doing web stuff, and I just hang around and listen to these things.
Thanks, Eric. Alice?
Hey, so I'm a business analyst with outreach and online education, and I'm just trying to learn a little bit more about web components, and I'm interested in it from an enterprise architecture and documentation perspective.
Sweet. Cassandra?
Hey, I'm Catastrophe, or Cassandra Roberts. I work for Red Hat, and I work on the Patternfly Elements project.
And it's awesome. Jonathan, you want to
Sure.
introduce?
Jonathan Shealy. I work on a project called Try Crypto. We are essentially a create React app for blockchain type applications. And we're using web components for our front end kind of user interface to blockchain apps. Awesome.
And do you want to discuss anything around styling or?
Yeah, so I kind of get into it from, in building front ends is our web components, styling and what the real world looks like for people who are trying to integrate a custom theme, but want all their subcomponents to look exactly the same without re-importing the entire style sheet.
Cool. All right. So I think that would be, we can have some time to talk about styles and different ways you can pass style sheets around between elements. We use lit element in part for that, but that'd be a good discussion. Mike, you got anything, bearing in mind that if we're talking state management, we're going to keep that till whenever Nikki shows up?
Yeah, I'm Mike Potter. I work for the College of Science here at Penn State. And I also contribute to the HAX project. I played around with doing some on-the-fly variable manipulation this week. So changing CSS variables depending on the current state of your elements. So I can show that. That's not exactly what Nikki's going to go into, but it's more around what the possibilities that CSS variables bring. So,
Andrew, anything you want to share? Just say hi as well.
Hey everyone, I'm Andrew Gerhard. I work in the Penn State University Libraries in the Applications and Integrations Department, and I am working on a couple different things, but both basically just still kind of new to web components and pushing as hard as I can to get up to speed with them.
So Pennsylvania rules most of this meeting, I see.
Yes. Yeah, well, also unfairly, Penn State rules much of this meeting as well. So it's a little lopsided in that regard.
Yeah, I didn't know if you caught. I'm about randomly an hour away from you.
All right. So I think Mike, you wanna kick us off with what you had in mind? Yes. Styles are certainly something that's been a major discussion point. I know was at HAX Camp when we had that in October. Nikki and wow, I'm totally blanking. I need way more caffeine. Who's your project manager, Cassandra?
Kendall.
Kendall, thank you. Jeez,
Yeah, she's my manager.
So Nikki and Kendall might as well have just had their own conference at from halfway through till the after party and beyond, just talking about styles and the implications for CSS variables and things. So it's certainly a big topic. Mike, do you got something you want to show, or I can also try and queue up some examples of sharing style sheets around, because we could use some feedback in the way Simple Colors mixes stuff around things.
Now my demo just broke. Just 1 second.
Beware the world.
Yep. Yeah, if you could keep something.
I'm gonna do a song and dance while Mike does that. So we, for some color standardization, Nikki did this element for us called Simple Colors. And so Simple Colors has a couple different ways you can use it. We've got a superclass export, so we can mix it into multiple projects. Primarily lit element is where we do a lot of our development. And so she's got a superclass in which she's written Sass. So we've got Sass that just basically generates a whole mess of CSS variables for us. And then we use those in two different ways. So it spits it into this Simple Colors super, if you will. And then we also have a shared styles component. So let me see what the shared Simple Color shared styles is its own repo. Wow, she has changed it since I last saw it. And Simple Color shared styles extends lit element, so we can either mix into existing elements, or we can use this as kind of a base element definition. We also have some older things we've been doing with components where we need to bridge kind of global state, unfortunately. And for those, we end up having this request availability singleton pattern, which, let me see if we actually use this one anywhere. Nikki loves adding in lots of flexibility for us as far as abstraction. Okay, that is used a couple places, nice. And I'm in our mono repo right now. We have a mono repo of like 170 plus NPM repos. So a lot of times it will tee this up, or one of the ways we can tee it up, I shouldn't say a lot of times. One of the ways we can tee this up is doing a request availability. So I don't know when, in this case, the HAX CMS theme wiring is going to be applied to something. But from a timing perspective, I don't want to invoke all of our CSS variables to get injected into the page until something actually cares about having access to them. So what's going on with her request availability? And this is a pattern. This sort of starts to step towards state management. And I know it's something Nikki wants to showcase specifically around video player, is creating these kind of single elements that are managing something. And so the managing something in this case is actually adding an element to the DOM that then adds all of the styles in question. Now the styles in this case are just a whole mess of CSS variables. As you can see, as I scroll through them, a lot of them. Simple Colors is more or less there for just colors, but it does provide some additional functionality, like we can figure out what the hex code for the 8th level of red is, either in JavaScript without accessing the styles and applying it that way, or because of the way she's done the Sass, we can just name something such as simple-colors fixed theme deep orange 4 and get the same hex code. So we've used this across a lot of different elements that we have, either applying to kind of the top level of the document so that we get all the CSS variables to paint, or much more common is wrapping Simple Colors into something else. So for example, we have a multiple choice element. We'll use Simple Colors as a subclass of lit element in this case. And this is schema behaviors that wraps on some other functionality via superclass. But then in our styles right here, where we're doing our spread operator for super.styles, that is going to be pulling in effectively all of these styles and these CSS variables we have, not via the super, right there. So she's got simple color super, which then actually mixes into lit element with nothing else going on, exported, and then in this case pulled into multiple choice. So that then we have all of those CSS variables set locally, and it's not just for CSS variables because those could cascade, it's more so these. So she has a series of attribute-based selectors so that we can just say, hey, this element should be dark and its accent color should be purple, for example. I think accent color is in here. Yeah, there we go. So that if you said, hey, the accent color of this element is gray, an interesting paradigm that we can apply to individual elements is saying, okay, well, use the default, and that's what this default theme is. So the default theme connotation for us is that the elements themselves can say, hey, I am, and in this case, gray. But if the element said, I am red, and the element implementing this says, well, use default theme accent 6, that gives us a extremely controlled common color across the different spectrum. So that we have the same hue of that color, no matter what the color ends up being. So then is applied into multiple choice, simple colors. Let's see, default gray for checkboxes. There's default, there it is, default theme accent 8 in this case. So using a combination of these variables and the attributes for like dark is how in an element like multiple choice, let's start there. And actually, I don't even think multiple choice uses the colors that much, if I'm to be perfectly honest. There we go. So there's some of the colors in question. Multiple choice isn't a great example for that. Self-check is actually. So self-check does darn near the same thing. Let me open that one up. There we go. So this is our self-check element that uses simple colors. And if I fire self-check up, self-check will leverage those differences in color like this, right? So this is accent color light blue, whereas this one is accent color red. Now, I'm not positive. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah, I was going to say I'm not positive, but this is accent color yellow dark. And so because of the way that we have these, if I take dark off, it flips to the hue of yellow at that exact same level, but you notice the text changed. So part of the reason we have those arrays of color information is so Nikki's basically teed it up so that it can be made self-aware of when a color is going to cause a contrast ratio accessibility issue. And so then if I flip this over to dark again and we do green, we more or less are able to create, because this is HAX wired, but so we're able to create this experience within this little element here that it can't be having a color contrast accessibility issue while still giving flexibility in certain ways that is presented.
Very cool.
Very elegant. We did something similar. We used a -- theme variable, which can be set internally or externally. And so if you set like on your card component, you say, I want to use the accent color, and the accent color is like a dark, it should have a dark theme, for example. It would set, the component itself would set the theme variable, and then any nested components inside of that would check the context of that variable when they upgrade, and they would get an on dark attribute based on that variable.
Very cool. Have you have you done anything around pegging that to the user's preference for dark mode or light mode?
Not yet. I'm really excited about doing that. I think that would be separate from like the theme context. I think that would be just using the media queries inside of different color selections to say like if you've got this set, then use this color instead.
And whenever you're saying, do you have this set? How are you checking that?
There's a media query that you can do. I forget the exact syntax of it. I'd have to Google it, but I think it's like a media query that says like contrast selection true or
Okay.
dark. I think it's dark, light, and default or something like that.
Gotcha.
There's prefers color scheme is the selector in a media query, and then it's dark, light, or no preference.
Which is basically light, I think, right now for most people.
Yeah, it makes sense. So we had 3 people join after we kicked off. So as 2 of you are new, Chuck, we know Chuck. So Aiden and Kevin, the way these things operate, we all kind of go around the same way we do unconference style and kind of say who we are, where we're from. I'm also making you aware now that this is recorded and we put these out on our YouTube channel afterwards. So you don't have to bring something you want to talk about, but we were just talking about some color style stuff. Jonathan probably ends up having some specific questions or things maybe he wants to show around, ways of handling styling with elements in a larger React app. But at this time, Kevin, if you want to go first, if you're in an environment where you can. Oh, good. Okay. I was about to say, like, if you're not in a work environment, but obviously none of us are. So if you want to say what your interest is, or if you have anything you want to talk about, and then Aiden, you can go after Kevin.
Yeah. I mean, I have seen you start doing these. Obviously, you're actively promoting it in social, but just basically sitting in the back of the room virtually, listening in on what you're doing and sponging up information. We're going in circles like a lot of people right now as far as what we're doing. So web components are still on the table, but we're, I don't know, just learning at this point. So I'm going to go back to sitting in the back of the room.
But you've done a bunch of stuff with Lightning, right?
We've done a bunch of testing. We haven't done anything real. And the vendor that was supposed to be on site this month to get our Salesforce implementation up and running and onboard everyone is obviously on hold indefinitely. So we'll see where we end up after all this sorts itself out. So yeah,
Cool.
basically for the last year, I've been learning while maintaining a single D7 site. It's been a pretty cush year.
D7. I feel your
All
pain.
right, going back to the back of the room.
All right.
My name is Aiden Sawyer. I work at Boston University Libraries. We have a pattern of web components and styles that we use that I try and help them to maintain and grow. Might give a talk on or a section on our announcement banner. It's got a neat integration to Google Sheets API. A pretty timely point where you might need to make an announcement. So yeah, might cover that, but really interested in the styling stuff for accessibility and colors. I know Patternfly gave a really good, cool presentation on that, and looking forward to hearing more about that from the part that I missed.
Chuck, you want to just, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to talk about or maybe show or announce at a certain URL if it's ready in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I don't show it because I shared some last week and I want to see what other people were doing. But if anybody wants to go to odlscience.psu.edu, Mike and I launched our new department site this week, so we're pretty stoked about that.
It is the first HAX CMS site that is a legit website that is not just one of our stock themes. So it certainly still needs some cleanup in the performance areas if you would compress those GIFs and JPEGs for the love of God. But but it's awesome looking. I guarantee most people will go to, especially as they keep cleaning it up to improve SEO, and not believe that it is it's an entirely web component driven site all the way down. Looks like we have another person on. Andrew, if you want to say hey and who you are, we are recording these for future use, or if you have anything you'd like to talk about or questions, it's kind of what we do to kick off.
Hey, not really. I'm Andrew Noblett. I work a lot with Polymer and Lit Element, and I've been doing it for a few years now, following your guys' project as well, for at least the past year and a half. But I'm pretty much interested in anything web components. You guys do a great job.
Cool. Well, if you have anything specific you want to see or show off, because this is, an Uncode being that we're trying to keep with the unconference spirit, feel free. Mike, do you have your thing queued up?
Yeah, I do. It's really two parts. One that's like more towards what we were talking about with the theming, and then one that's very specific.
Okay, so Aiden, why don't you shoot for going after Mike?
Okay.
Does that work? Cool. All right, go for it, man.
Okay. Just real quick to dovetail off of what we were talking about with the styling. Cassandra started a repo that was outlining all of the shared variables that we could have using the -- theme prefix. Did you talk about that last week, Cassandra? I missed it.
I didn't. I would love to talk about that this
Yeah,
week if there's time.
Yeah, I think that would be the most beneficial thing that we could cover.
That is now the thing we're doing. Boom.
Yeah. Is that what repo is that located at?
It is in my, let's see, let me find the link here. My projects.
Okay.
And it is WC theming standards. So here it is. I will paste it here for you.
All right.
All the good stuff's in the wiki.
Oh, gotcha.
And the issue queue, which has stuff for discussion, but the wiki shows kind of the outline.
Okay. Not to put you on the spot or anything, but I'm wondering if maybe would you want to drive for a second to
Yeah. Do you want me to
explain this?
pick up screen share? I didn't want to
Yeah.
take over.
Yep, go for it.
Okay. Host disabled attendee screen sharing. Now I'm a co-host.
Yeah.
Oh, so fancy.
You should be able to share now.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Cool beans. I'll skip right into the good stuff because I like code. So these are some of the proposed variables. I have a story in a future sprint. I'm not sure, it's not assigned yet, but a story that I'm working to get into a sprint where I'm going to collaborate with there's the Patternfly project and then the web components facet of it. I want us to get together and kind of standardize around these general variables instead of using, right now we have namespace variables. But these kind of break it down into a couple of different sections. So you have UI variables, which are things like buttons, toggles, little tiny things that appear, little icons, like things that appear on your screen in your UI. And then you have surface variables, which are cards, bands, accordions, tab sets, large swaths of space that usually have more text based on them. So there's those variables around that, and they're pretty similar. You'll notice like there's link values, colors, different variants for colors. Like we kind of went with some super generic naming. I've seen a lot in Patternfly and in the HAX project using like numbers, like accent 1, accent 2, accent 3, and that's a good approach. We've tried to keep it really minimal and just do base, complement, accent, and disabled. And in Surface, you'll see the addition of lightest, lighter, and darker, darkest. That's because they're CSS variables. So you can always override what the value is, you know? So in a context where I want to kind of change the accent color to be a little bit darker, you would just update what the value of that variable is for accent. So accent would then have a new meaning, but that list of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 for different shades would live in your system as maybe SAS variables or some other format. It would just live in your system. So this is super minimal, super open-ended theming that could kind of cascade. And you can also go crazy with your variable nesting. So if you wanted to assign this theme variable to some internal variable that you have, you can do that too with a fallback. And then border settings with different properties for border. And the bullet points usually outline variants or subsets. And I think I have an example. So this is just all of the suggested variables in descriptive terms, but I'm thinking, do I have an example of just like some output? I don't. Yeah, they kind of end up looking like this, like using the BEM naming, dash dash, general, dash dash font family, heading font family. I think I'll add that next. For proposed variables, I just want to just do like a big like data dump of like what would this look like spelled out in usually we assign ours to root. You could do it contextually too. For your theme, you could apply your theme to like a section of your site. You don't have to apply the theme everywhere. And then the idea behind this, the whole driver behind this, is that these variables would be universal. So if I throw a polymer, if I throw a HAX component, if I throw a pattern fly component on my page, they should all have a similar look and feel, similar colors, similar UI, unless it's relevant to the component that it not change. So the component developer needs to make the decision about where to put these variables. So I would say, you know, oh, I don't want you to customize the border radius because it's really important to the fidelity of this component that the border radius not change. So then we don't surface that as the theme variable. We wouldn't use that hook. That would be hard coded. But maybe you want to allow for color customization. Then you would use the theme variables so that you can allow people to hook in with fallbacks built into your system, so that it kind of has, your fallbacks are your system's look and feel, like how you would want to use. So think material design. They've got a very set like color palette and everything. And so those would be their fallbacks. And so if you just throw it on your page with no theme, you just get a material design component. Woohoo! But if you're a very opinionated site, these themes would allow you to kind of make them all look and feel the same.
Cool.
What I was going to show was, after I saw your discussion at HAX Camp and this proposal, I put together a little repository of what the theming pattern could look like. So it's at this URL here. Just chat.
This is so cool. I didn't know this existed.
Oh, really?
You should have pinged me with this.
I think I did, but I think I was like putting it together as I was pinging you on Twitter.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So the idea is that if we could standardize on all these proposal CSS variables that are prefixed by theme, you could have an example where I have this X card, and this is, by the way, how Chuck has been building his elements, where this looks a little crazy, but it's got a very distinct pattern. So what we do is we're first going to target the part attribute, which if you're unfamiliar with part, CSS parts are being standardized where you can select a part using this selector, and that should filter down and hit all of the parts. So this is a way for you to theoretically pierce Shadow DOM. So if we, instead of targeting CSS selectors and IDs, what if we targeted parts just by default? And then we, pretty much everything we do, we have a CSS variable assigned to a property. So in this case, this top color width, God, I wish that thing wouldn't pop up all over the place. If we're targeting width on our top color part, instead of saying just 100%, what if we defined an actual variable for that property specifically that could be overridden from anywhere? So you as a user could go into the root and alter the width of your card through here. So if I had this set, I can obviously go into the root here and alter it to say 50% instead.
Now, I've noticed that at least in our repo, if you override a CSS variable from a web component at the root, it doesn't cascade. I think the specificity is not quite there. Like it uses the fallback value instead. The only way I've been able to override the value of a CSS variable on a specific component is to actually use like a class on that thing. So like on a card, I'd have to say like custom card and then override the variable. How have you had success using custom properties at the root like this?
So you mean selecting a specific card in this case?
No, I mean generally. So like if I go to my root and I do PFE card -- width 80% or 50% like you did, I've found in the wild that our web components don't pick up that value because of the host specificity. There's some weird thing with like how it's understanding specificity with the host.
Yes. So I think this is where this comes in. So what we have always done before is anytime that we specified a CSS variable, we set it up on our host. We initially defined it. We defined like a fallback on our host. Would you do that?
Yeah, I can after you're done, I can share kind of like what ours looks like, and maybe you can tell me like how tell me where I've gone wrong, because there's some specificity thing that drives me crazy that I can't get.
Yeah, this drove me nuts, because by us doing that, we were in a sense introducing the problem that you just described. Which for this specific example wouldn't be an issue. So I'm pretty sure that this, no matter where this element showed up, if I overrode that CSS variable at the root, it would permeate down through all of our web components.
You can see it updating for at least 2 of the bars already.
Right. Yeah. Now it is because it's right in the light DOM here. So I could set it up into like another web component that had a shadow DOM.
So that extra nesting might be an issue.
Yeah, so I'll try that. But I'm pretty sure that works. Now, the issue that I had whenever I was trying to implement the theming standard was that the idea of the theming standard is I could set theme x at 1. That's like, or let's just say like theme font color. That is just an agreed upon CSS variable that we all use across all of our projects. So I would be able to override this at the root of my project. And then anytime I'm implementing a web component that's using color at all, I would think to myself, okay, well, knowing that this standardized theme variable exists of font color, how am I going to use this in my web component? And I would say, okay, well, let's just say that I wanted to implement color on the text part here. So I want this property to now tie in to the theming standard. To do that, and this is like so freaking complicated that hopefully I can articulate this, but basically you define a specific CSS variable for this part, for this exact selector here. So xcard text color, that will target that specific property. And then as a fallback, you say, if nobody's overridden that property yet, I want to use the xcard text color local variable. Now, what the heck is that? So that variable is what ties into the theme color font. That makes it so if that makes all the fallbacks handle correctly. So
I'm
that
having a light bulb moment. This is great. It's
Okay.
because your variables are empty. The first
Yes.
variable in the list is empty. So it's always going to look at the fallback unless you have a theme.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, we went that route at first. I think Kendall talked me out of it.
Okay. All right.
I can't speak for her. I don't know why.
Yeah. No, I would love to hear why. Because yeah, this is like a real melon tweaker that I'm still not sure about, but it works. But it is ungodly confusing to reason about just looking at what's going on here. But basically the premise is that every property gets its own unique CSS variable. And with a fallback. And then if you want to tie it into the theme, what you do is properties that are tied into the theme convention define a CSS variable with this pattern: -- element name -- CSS part name -- CSS property. And what does that? I don't know if that means what I intended it to mean.
No, it's you have xcard is element name, and then top color is the part name.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But the default for the fallback for it is then this local variable that is tied into the overarching theme variable.
I think that's really good if you're reusing that top value. So like if you're reusing background color default and text color local multiple times in your component, that's going to be really helpful. If you're only using it once, you could probably save yourself a little time, and then just in the part text where you've got like text color local, you could just put the theme value right there. And that would save you one step.
I think for some reason, because that's what you told me on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I tried to do that and it wasn't behaving like I thought it was. It was like something was being overridden that I didn't intend to be overridden. And maybe it was this fallback variable or fallback value. I forget. But yeah, I'll have to revisit it to see if that's still the case.
Is there, Cassandra, would there be a reason why we wouldn't maybe have, instead of, Mike, if you scroll over a little, yeah. So like you have that ultra specific host selector, Mike, but isn't the whole point of these that these are locally driven overrides for this very specific element? So wouldn't we want Cassandra's theming convention stuff to be applied to the global, but then local, you could almost have like local background color default, or are you still trying to keep with the tag name for a reason? Because are you going to set xcard top color background color default at the top level of your application? Because based on what you said before, that wouldn't even work.
This?
Yeah, so like you wouldn't be able to set that at the root selector and have it apply because host is always going to overtake it, right?
No, that should work.
I love learning how the browser works in this way because Sandra, we
Yeah.
go back and forth on this crap all the time.
No,
Yeah, I think that's what I tried is basically what you've got there, and that ended up with a specificity issue.
Okay.
Because yeah, see, it's not changing to purple. So this is the issue. Would you mind if
I? Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Because I think I want you to just see what this code looks like real quick. Here we go. So this is a compiled version of the style. We build them all separate, right? So this gets injected into our style tag. This is my host for the card. You can see we define like all of our variables right up top. And here immediately we're mapping them to these theme. These would conceivably become just theme container spacer, for example. And this, if I try to override padding top on every card on the page at root, this cannot beat the host specificity because it picks up calc instead. I can override container spacer at the root because this technically has no value set by the project. It's only for theme. So I think you're right. The key is empty variables. The only way that it works cascading from root down is if you have an empty variable in your component to hook into.
Gotcha.
But I can override padding top if I just add like a class to my card. Or if I just do like PFE card, the name of my web component, and then just override card padding top, I can override it because that is more specific than host.
Exactly. But you can't, it won't cascade through Shadow DOM, that selector.
Yes, it will.
Will it?
Yeah. Yeah, it still cascades.
Yeah.
Trying to think if I think I have a code pen that does this. Customizing a web component. I think this is it. Yeah, so custom styles 1 is a class that's on one of the cards. And that overrides the border property, which if I go back to the code, the border property is being set equal to border weight, border style, border color. So I'm just like ignoring all of those in one swath by overriding that generic property. And then that picks up here, no problem. And that is in the Shadow DOM because we render the card body in the Shadow DOM. Let's see if there's any more. Custom styles 4. This one does it too. Background position, background color. To give us this kind of weird gradient.
What's the rationale for the capital letters?
Oh, that is if you're referencing a CSS property by name. So background position is a CSS property, background dash position. So in BEM, if you're directly pointing to a CSS property, you do uppercase.
Okay, cool, thank you.
You've helped me so much. I'm so excited.
I am more confused, to be honest, but that's good.
Tradesies.
That means I'm going to be watching this video on a loop this week.
Reading through the CSS spec, it says that host acts like any other pseudo selector since it's not a real one, although pseudo selectors kind of have magic powers, relatively speaking.
And don't work in Shadow DOM and Safari. Thanks, Safari.
I'm going to go on record and say Safari is the new Internet Explorer.
Thank you for beating me to that. That's literally what I was about to say.
Seems to be the consensus. Someone needs to sit down the browser developers at Safari and be like, yo, don't do this.
You've read a history book before, and we've been through this. I actually, if I may, I have like a different approach. So I noticed mostly what you guys have that I've seen here is like Greenfield, where you're customizing the components, everything about them from beginning to end, what they essentially look like. Um, my approach is using something like Tailwind CSS, and I want to start from that standpoint because I don't want to mess with colors, theme, style, any and layout. I want to use that existing kind of technology so I can skip a step and then work my way backwards essentially. So in the way I ended up doing it for now, which was totally a hack, but kind of was solving my problems, was step one using lit elements, changing the create render route. So I completely got rid of Shadow DOM. But knowing that's not practical and caused a couple of other problems for me, specifically re-renders of components because of the way I was force injecting the components in, it caused re-renders, and I want to get rid of all that. So backing out of the create render route, but I still want that main style theme that's coming down. So I did this hack. I can simplify these windows here, but
Holy man.
this is essentially a cascading. But ultimately, I just did this trick. So I have my Webpack just building out and exporting out a CSS file. So I just kludged it in here. Now I did this versus what is referenced everywhere is to do kind of one of these static get styles. The problem I had with this one is this one uses the replace sync method of the underlying component. And because I'm using an import, it does not like that. It'll throw. So this is the only way I could kind of inject it manually is to do it this way. So I could actually use the replace function instead of the replace sync, which is what I believe lit element is actually using. And I don't know of a way yet of overriding that. But ultimately, this is sort of the, I guess, partially the solution I want, but I was wondering, is there a better way to kind of take from an existing CSS, whether or not it'd be Bootstrap or, whatever. So instead of building out every single component manually, how do I start from a state that has already been given and then just work our way up from there? So I don't know if there's a colloquial way of doing that, or is it?
So I actually just did this a couple nights ago with material library. Just at material, not the web component. Let me see if I can pull up an example.
Yeah, and from my understanding, obviously the way I hacked that in there is I essentially copied the whole parsing of that entire CSS library into each one of the components, which you don't want to do. In a best case world, only maybe the classes that I'm using in that component would get pulled in. But even then, you still want to share them somehow. So whether or not it's like Bryan's first example that he was showing, which having the element that essentially the parent style wrapper, if you will, that you were showing, that is partially the way, and to do it that way, and then that way they can at least inherit one style instead of having to repeat them. But I'm not sure about the piercing because each one of these components is then nested under like this. How far do I have? Where exactly do I have to put it that it doesn't repeat it 12 times versus just one?
So part of the reason I think lit element uses that the sync or async or whatever it is version is because it will fall on constructible style sheets like you're using there with that class, right? And I think it'll kind of garbage collect them all into one so that you actually only get one copy, even if like hundreds of elements are referencing that same one. That's my understanding of it, at least. And then the styles thing it'll be able to do a fallback for browsers that don't natively support that, the CSS style sheet as a JavaScript object thing.
Yeah, I think I got the same gist from that as well, which is why they don't do the the replace method, because there's essentially artifacts that they can't control in there because they don't know what kind of imports you might be doing inside of that file.
Yeah, I'm looking for, I know there's some Bootstrap elements that people merge lit element with Twitter Bootstrap. I'm trying to find how they did those. Whoa, there is some weird CSS going on here. I'll paste in the chat. It looks like they're trying to actually rebuild Bootstrap around having custom elements be involved, which is not what I expected. I thought it was just going to be a direct CSS reference.
Yeah, this one also, at least from the beginning, kind of looks like it's just custom in that getter.
Share so we're not all there. Just so we're on the same page as what it is I'm looking at. Cassandra, if you want to feel physically ill, look at this. Yeah.
Good times.
Colors mapped. Let's just spread and put. Who needs Sass when we can just do it live? That's an interest. I have not seen that approach used.
Yeah. Yeah, so it seems like there's kind of like this part of the world seems like a questionable thing, which is like we haven't quite figured out the best way to take existing frameworks and meld them into the web components world. It's basically greenfield from the bottom up, and we're essentially pushing our styles out to the host versus having the host pull them in.
Yeah, we run into this with so Patternfly has a CSS file that styles all of their components based on HTML. We're kind of starting out new web components, building things. We've been building things, like you say, greenfield, but we really wanted to bring in existing styles. But the problem is they've applied all of these styles to classes, and these classes don't really fit well in the web component because it's like, well, that's a slot and that's nested and that's in the shadow DOM, and so I need to put this attribute and this attribute, and so we're kind of having to rethink both approaches and create. What we're doing is having the Patternfly project create extends, which we can then in the mono repo of our project pull in their stuff as a dependency and then extend those styles in sets where we need to, and then they would just apply those extends to their classes. Not the best solution, and it requires that you be on really good terms with the people who own the project that you want to extend.
Yep. Yeah, I just philosophically thinking about this over the last couple hours, I was thinking it would be amazing. It's essentially a Babel plugin, though. If the component could just figure out the classes that I'm using and then go rip them out of Tailwind and just shove them into the styles as a Babel plugin, that sort of solves the problem, at least getting them in there. And it's a compile time issue, not a actual dealing with it as far as manually entering the styles. But that's my 30 second
we can figure it
gist.
out at an import level. With using that import CSS, we can have that be going there and not have to rely on things like Babel. So anytime I hear Babel or transpilation, it really freaks me out.
So you were saying you think how was it you recommended?
I have no intelligent way of saying how I hope this will work.
Oh.
At all. I'm in the same position as well, and it is that this is greenfield. But I just expect and hope that there will be a way to kind of we have ES module import loading with JavaScript, that there will be something like that with CSS loading, where you kind of just specify with a CSS variable which of the set of options you want to be importing CSS from, and it'll go out and grab it that way.
I swear I've seen. So I agree. That's definitely gonna be the path forward, because that's my hope with there's the import spec has modular HTML, modular CSS, and modular JSON all as proposals, which you get modular JSON, and then I'm just killing all my Ajax and fetch calls and things. But I swear I've seen things that use the unsafe CSS lit element capability to go and fetch your CSS file and then just treat it like it's unsafe CSS and inject it into the CSS.
Yeah, that was my first approach, and I tried that, except for that only works if you're not then using these kind of libraries like Tailwind or something like that then does the imports. If you end up with for instance, the very first thing I have at the top of one of my CSS files is an import to Google Fonts. So it doesn't pull that into a raw CSS file. So then because it has imports, it can't use ultimately the CSS DOM to do that replace sync. So you end up in the same position as you would if you weren't doing it that way.
So in our kludge way as well, I agree with you. This is certainly an area where, you know, greenfields versus old things. Let me show it. So the simple colors thing I showed, that is like our, hey, we have this wonderful thing where we've never built an application before. However, when we actually use this when we use our stuff in HAX CMS, yes, we're in that scenario where we're building the entire universe so we can have total control. But when we get into, like, this is one of our production applications, and Mike and I have talked about this before, of you mentioned breaking the shadow root. We will break the shadow root on anything that goes into the production app to get at what we consider like the content or main area. So I don't know if that helps at all, but if you, in that case, like our video player, which we would consider like greenfields, this has a very specific way of looking. It's not going to matter what environment's dropped into, that shadow root. The full application layer, which is like this little click and jump to different pages thing, that is ultimately all light DOM, as you can see with this MOOC content element, which is light DOM all the way through, and then just has all this stuff in its inner area.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, so it's not you're saying sometimes not using the shadow root is okay. It's not like a taboo thing.
Oh no, we break those all the time. I think it's more of like, know why you're doing it.
Yep.
And then if you're Cassandra, you're laughing because you're like, haha, you people and your shadow roots.
You can do both. You act like we don't use any. We use
I know.
shadow root.
That's fair. All right. Yeah, I was getting the impression that that, you know, if you were doing the, you know, create render root, that you were, you know, you needed slapped every time you did that. But it also solved the problem in a pinch. So I was like, well, we're doing it that way.
I think you just need to know
I default to
why.
light DOM whenever I can
Okay.
as well.
Good to know. Thank you.
This was an awesome discussion. I love that Tom is going to cut this whole thing. We've got this whole continuity of people talking about this. So leading into, because Aiden, I know you have your sub element that you then immediately break the shadow root, jerk. You ready to tee up and show what you've been working on?
Sure. Could I get sharing abilities?
While we're in limbo here, I wanted to get this on camera to remind myself that the host selectors that were local, I did have a comment in there that says don't try to select these CSS variables, and I took it out for some reason, so I need to add that back in. Does that make sense? So like whenever we tried to override the Xcard top color background color default, that would not have worked. You're right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And I had a note in there, but I took it out. So, cut.
All right, fire away, Aiden.
All right. So I found myself a while ago wanting to have a pretty standardized way of having a announcement banner. It ended up working pretty well. So let me share screens here.
That would help.
Yep. This is Storybook. This is BuLib. We have a welcome page here. So we were in a situation where I wanted to have an announcement banner in case anything went wrong or there was like a pandemic or anything. And then also wanted it to work if JavaScript wasn't enabled or if you were on IE or some other thing happened. So I have a CSS version of it, a CSS and HTML only version of it, and I have a web components version of it. But the benefit of having it be web components as well is that you get some nice dismiss functionality. So just walking through here, there's the basic color stuff. This uses CSS variables as well. And then there's, call to actions. Just find the part that's most interesting here. The memory part I did find interesting. So you get onto a page, say this guy, and you've heard a lot about this thing going on called COVID, and you're sick of hearing about it, so you just dismiss it. You want it to be so that you don't refresh the page, and every single time you hit any of these sites, it goes away. So you need to store it somehow. What I did is I wrote a really simple memory storage helper that just looks into local storage for you, and that'll work across all the different sites. One of the consistent themes for anytime Vue Libraries is using web components is that we're using them on like a bunch of different sites with a bunch of different platforms, and can't rely on what technology that thing's using. So we don't do a whole app based out of web components. We kind of do that individual use idea. So we needed something that communicates between sites, has some sort of memory without doing a giant MobX solution. So local storage is a great use case for that. We also wanted to be in a situation where I don't have to be a developer who knows HTML in order to put one of these things on. So we found something in, I think originally this was in a WRLC, is a library consortium. Forget what the WR stands for, but they had a Primo customization. This idea came from them. But basically we wanted to set it up so that you could say like what code it is, give a brief description, and be able to control whether these banners show up on all of your websites just from a Google Sheets. So you don't have to know anything about how any of all this works. You can just press one of these buttons and it shows up or doesn't show up on a page. I'm going to demo that really quick. This is staging site, and it's showing announce banner for BUL law. If I unclick that and then refresh the page, it's in the connected callback when it first gets connected to the page. It's noticing that the code that it's been given aligns with one of these guys, and then looks for the show banner and all the other information. And if that's off, then it doesn't show. But if it's on, then it does. So that was neat. So we've actually got to the point where we have a bunch of these across all of our sites, and the way that you kind of all of that, you can look these side by side. We'll be able to. I'm only sharing one of them. That's terrible.
Yeah, the single window will do that.
Yep, it will. So before, when I showed you a cool demo and you just saw something, you saw me refreshing a page and something disappearing. This I'm now on the like libcal site. So I go here, and I don't have to know how any of this stuff works as like a, my product manager or something. You just deselect that for libcal, refresh the page, and then it goes away. Or if I want to kind of change this from a like just informational thing to a warn, maybe change the date here because March 18th.
Not gonna lie, that's pretty slick.
Yeah, how did you interface with that?
It's really simple. It's really surprising. So all you have to do is add a, I don't know, can I do this? Remember this? Alt equals JSON. I think that was it.
Oh, so you have a public document.
Yeah, it's a public document. It's published somewhere. So you're, instead of grabbing the UI version from GitHub, you're just grabbing the JSON version and parsing the JSON. So I'll get the code for that real quick and share that out.
That's really cool.
Solution. And
Yeah.
a great use case for web components too.
Yeah, I was really surprised. So I actually was happy to implement this before this whole thing. So this was able to be used by my advisor when I was out sick and at a conference. So you were able to just add these announcement banners to all the sites. So yeah, pulling up the code real quick. Yep. So I'm building that. This is in a branch.
Hey, there's that create render route.
Your favorite. So yeah, you just feed it an API code, and then it's just doing this. And yeah, it's just the public version of it, and then alt equals JSON. So I'll grab that. Please hold. have to replace the. So I was trying to figure out a way. What I thought about doing was creating an open version of this, if you guys are interested in this. And instead of, like, you give it a list of codes from this API. Say you have like some list of these, and it'll just show whatever it finds in that based on the codes that you give it. So you give it an API, you give it again, the ID of the Google spreadsheet, and then say you want, the code for primo all, libcal, and libguides, and you just make your own version of whatever this thing is. You give me the ID of the Google sheet, and I can, as long as you're following this basic outline, I can show you any announcement banner on any site, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, that's really cool.
It's actually remarkably simple. It's just, yeah. I'll show a link to just this code and add that to the chat. Chat again.
I call it a poor man's CMS, as it were, to add a CMS feature to a non-CMS website, but that's really awesome.
Yeah. I totally wants this chat here.
Yeah, and I've seen
here we go.
Educators kind of hack together like grade response type of stuff, or like having, because you can make those Google Sheets public, right? So then anybody can contribute to them. And if you set in motion some standards as far as what the inputs are, you get a really cheap and easy cloud delivered JSON API.
Yeah, and one other interesting thing, I'll pull it up really quick.
Guess you could even put a Google form in front of that sheet. That way you get people to fill it out the right way.
And that's another way that I've seen some educators use before. And I was like, I would never think to do that.
What's neat too is you can have multiple ones. So I have one just kind of labeled all. If you see it in the spreadsheet that my window management is terrible right now. Apologies. But there's this all here on line 13. You can have that all show up on all of the different sites. And if they dismiss it and store their dismissal into a local storage variable, they don't have to dismiss it on every separate platform that they're on, and it shows up on all the different platforms. So here I'm actually using, there's like a specific view for Primo. Then there's all of the Primo, regardless of views. And then there's every site that BU has. So we're able to show that at specific varying depths and show multiple ones stacked on top of each other. So if I know I want to inform all of our websites about COVID, for example, I can just write it up here and just click all, and I know that all of the ones that's been added to, it's going to show up on. And that's basically it.
And that setting, then, when you say show up on every site or not every site, that's on the same domain or subdomain or
any domain.
How are you managing that? Because I was under the impression local storage only worked at one domain.
I will double check that. It might work on you might be right. It's only on one domain. And because I was checking it. We can check that really quickly.
There are hacks to get around that, but
yeah.
Probably on the top level BU domain, right?
If our sites were organized better, then yes, they would be.
Yeah. You could do it on the top level BYU or BU domain, or if you remember what single sign-on systems were like about 5 or 6 years ago, Google and Microsoft would actually bounce you constantly to an iframe domain and then pull your token off of that.
Years ago? Do you mean today?
Yeah, that one too. They still do it that way?
Oh yeah, you get bounced all over the place when you try to log into any Microsoft product.
So yeah, if you open,
I was wrong. It's just for site. Yeah, it's just for specific domains.
So if you use that ask a librarian.bu.edu, you could have like just a static page basically, and then your implementation tying into it would be to open an invisible iframe that uses post message, and basically just the script on the other side just broadcasts that little setting.
Sure. Okay. That's interesting.
If it's that annoying. I don't know if it's that annoying.
No, it's not that annoying. It's probably overkill.
And a fun fact I learned that I'll be implementing in my web components, but local storage has an event listener. So you can actually synchronize like multiple windows on the same domain. based on setting flags in local storage. So like I've seen a colloquial use case is like if you have like a markdown editor and then like a preview window, when you save, quote unquote, even though it's not going into the server, you save the markdown, it could just save the value to local storage, and then the preview event kicks that over and he sees that and it just refreshes the markdown. And then you never had to go to the server. There's no eventing between the two. They're completely separate pages.
Can you observe changes to the local state?
Yes.
Oh,
Yep.
nice.
You get it's like a general, it's almost just like post message where you get this general bucket and then you can ask the event like what value changed or did anything change, and then you can go inspect it if you need to.
That is very cool.
Yeah, that is neat. I didn't know that. Aiden, that is a very neat use case. I like that.
Thanks.
I was just decrying a lack of standardization in messaging at the university in my class this week.
Nice.
Yeah, it's not like we have a crisis and we have these web components no one's using and we certainly couldn't just put them on every site, but instead everybody has to go and do it themselves.
Yeah, that's been an interesting similar problem at BU, is that it's no longer a technical problem, which is awesome. It's a cultural problem, which is harder often.
Very true. So thus far, Nikki has stood us up. So we're just gonna have to talk about state management without her, and she'll have to join in whenever she gets here. So does anyone do, you mentioned, Aiden, you don't want the bloat of MobX, which is blasphemy. But
I don't mean like the bloat from a loading all of that information into, like, I don't want to have to think about how MobX works or require the next developer to, if it's something that I can solve at the local storage level.
I know, I'm just kidding.
I know.
But
I am also a fan of using local state instead of Redux or anything like that when practical. Redux is for bigger applications when you want to keep things smaller. I just pass around a couple of variables and call it a day.
Yeah, I look forward to growing to the point where I need MobX for a solution. Because stuff you guys do with it is incredible.
Mike, do you want to show anything in state management land?
Yeah, sure. Let me find my demo there.
Did you call up your demo yet?
It's been 2 seconds.
I know, but while Mike's doing demo, check out this awesome loading screen that he gave me. Look at that. Ah, it's so cool. Courtesy of the science loading.
You know, I Dockerize everything, and the only thing you care about is a loading screen.
I mean, it was a cool loading screen.
I don't know if you guys follow Nick Craver from Stack Overflow, but he said loading indicators are a sign of performance, not optimizing for performance.
So I did go over this at HAX Camp, but this is the link to the demo that I did. And what it is was a demo of MobX and how we've been using it in some of our, well, it's in HAX, the HAX editor. And what it is that it's probably the most simple state management library that's out there, in our opinion. Trust me, I've been through them all. And MobX seems to be like the most magic thing that I've ever used. And typically I wouldn't have liked all the magic, but after working with a lot of different state management libraries, I'm fully on board with the magic now. So the basic premise is that you have a store, just like every state management library has. So in this case, we have a count and some actions. And with MobX, what you can do is you can say this count here, I want to observe that. So I want to observe any state changes to that variable. And then you can also set up different actions. Actions are functions that change the state. So in your, let me call this up here. Okay.
I'm a huge fan of observables.
You are?
I am.
Okay. They aren't observables like are you talking about like RxJS?
Yeah,
Or-
they're like lightweight versions of them.
Yeah. So in there's a this is the finished product of the demo, so it's not much of a demo, so I'm sort of like deconstructing it after the case here. But basically in the demo, what I did was I did an initial demo, and I actually have a video. Tom, can you remember where I put that video? It's the like state management explained or something. I think you edited it for me. It's on my YouTube channel, but I go through setting up this counting app like the vanilla JavaScript way using event listeners, and then moving it to MobX, and then on top of that, using MobX lit element as a base class for how easy it is to tap into the store. So Westbrook, who was on the call last week, is working on this module or this base class MobX lit element. And what it allows you to do is just pass the store right into your render function, and you have access to everything in the store. So anytime store count changes, it's going to re-render this. Now, if you take a look at examples that are using MobX that aren't using this base class, what you have to do is you have to set up event listeners for every time these observables change. Now, it's not too bad. Like, I'll take it, but this just looks so clean here. So basically, if we had a this.name Mike, setting up a new state here for name, it's going to be an observable, and then I can just use that right in my render function. So I'm bringing the store in. This is the store that I'm exporting here, new instance of it. And right in my render function, I can just say store.name, and it shows up. So let's see here. Yeah, that's it. That's the demo. The video is like 45 minutes long, but basically we got here. So yeah, so why we use MobX is that we can that process of setting up a local state that's that is that easy to observe and to pass around to your other elements. So in this case, we're sharing state between the toolbar and the main body of the app. That is just like about as dead simple as you could possibly get, right? So the developer experience, I think that is about as good as you're gonna get.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that style. I don't like having to write the event listeners, and what I guess the equivalent of lit element is the request update. It kind of skips all that logic for you. So it just, if you update the property, it updates.
Yeah. So this is what we would do, what we are currently doing without using the lit MobX base class. The first thing that we do is, so we have local state. And in this case, we're pulling in the state from the HAX CMS store. So if you use HAX CMS, we provide you with a store that's already set up. So it has like your site hierarchy and links to all of your pages and what the active item is based on the URL. So it has the routing all baked in here. Now to use it, you implement the auto run function in MobX. So this is the magic of MobX. Is in your constructor, you set up an auto run function. And inside of that auto run, you just select anything in your store that you're looking to get. And this auto run function will automatically set up, start listening for these changes to these specific properties. So listeners to these specific properties for you.
So that's like React's connect function.
Yes. Yeah. And we're disposing those functions. Now, what you also have to do is you have to set local variables as well. So in lit, I would have to set up the this.manifest property for this element. Otherwise, the render function doesn't know that it needs to re-render. The MobX lit element, it just sets all that stuff up for you under the hood. So, yeah, I'm very excited about starting to use this base class.
Yeah, we can gut a lot of the internal logic to HAX CMS's site editor stuff that just involved either event juggling or yeah, just lots of auto runs. Like we have lots of properties that are duplicated other places. HAX itself uses event juggling in part because I didn't want to use MobX, because MobX 5, you can't support IE11. And stupidly, a year ago, I thought that would be important. And so I've changed course on that. So we're probably going to rewrite the state management in the HAX to not be event driven and be MobX lit element. And then it'll be in total alignment with HAX CMS as well in that regard. It's just so much nicer to use. Now, from a modular pieces standpoint, though, we're not going to ship MobX as a requirement for any of our elements that we would hope other people would use. And that's certainly been a little more complicated. Oh, Nikki's on. Nikki, are you actually there? You are there.
Yeah,
So
I'm actually here.
I would say Nikki's singleton paradigm is the only other way you can counter or circumvent this, right? So, for example, I'd say grid plate. I'm saying these words now, Nikki, so you can like queue up that part and be like, hey,
I have a couple of things queued up if you're
Awesome.
ready for me to share my screen. I wanted you to talk nice things about me first.
So I would say where we make that designation between the two, we have stuff that's event driven, like HAX is event driven. We're moving away from that. But if you're adopting HAX, you're adopting as part of a larger ecosystem. Same with HAX CMS. It's its own stinking system. It needs state management. But in the case of like Nikki's simple colors work, we're not going to require you have MobX just because you like our color set. Like that just doesn't make a lot of sense. Similarly with grid plate, I know is another big one, or we have like dialogues where we'll have event driven dialogues and a thing listening as a singleton to just control dialogues opening. So other than just saying you're wonderful, Nikki, would you like to take over?
I was wondering because there wasn't enough nice stuff about me there. That was just like about our shit. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. So I do, can you see what I have queued up?
Nope.
Expletive deleted. I had it set to share.
Yeah, she co-presented.
There we go.
There we go.
So that is not that's the wrong desktop. Can you see desktop too? With the relative heading demo?
Nice.
Yep.
Cool. All right, so I wanted to show you what this is being used in first, and then I'll show you the code that's behind that. So one of the simplest ones that I could show before we go up to video player is this relative heading demo, because I work in the world of learning content. And one of the things that would happen a lot is the fact that we would have to go bulk update a bunch of headings just because one heading level got updated. And we want to keep the heading hierarchy accessible. The other reason is sometimes we'd want to view by page. Other times we want the student to be able to download and print a whole lesson, and I'd like to keep the full lesson view as hierarchical as possible as well. So one of my wish lists for what I wish the web would do is have relative headings. Headings that you could say, hey, I'm a heading 2 as long as my heading 1 parent is here. But if my heading 1 parent becomes a heading 2, I'm a heading 3. And if it's not there, I'm a heading 1. So you can see what I have here are slotted headings with relative heading wrapped around them. And relative heading identifies the ID of the heading and what their parent ID is. So this one's parent is lorem ipsum, and you can see on down the road. So I could actually, reparent something, and you can see the headings get updated. Or I could, reparent something else down here. I can, update these headings very easily. And if we're on a page where lorem doesn't exist, everything else updates accordingly. Now, in order to be able to do that, you can't just have elements that sit by themselves. You want something that's managing state. So what I have, let me pull up relative heading state manager. So this is relative heading state manager. And relative heading light is actually, it gets the manager by requesting it initially. So you can see that it's saying, request availability. And so the manager has this, what we call the singleton pattern, where it's looking for an instance of that particular state manager. And if not, it's actually appending a state manager to the body of the document, which is this element down here. Now, what I do is I'm attaching my heading to the manager. The manager has an add heading function somewhere in here. And it's just, it's adding the heading to the list. And it's keeping track of the headings. When the heading goes away at disconnect, the heading gets removed down here.
I actually saw that pattern in one of the things that Bryan does. So that window, that actually is the host window. You're going all the way up from the shadow DOM element to the host.
Yep. So this is actually, this is the host window. And we're attaching this state manager to the host's body so that it's there for all the elements. All the headings then can attach themselves. This ensures up here, this ensures that there's only one, just like Highlander. My movie references are really old. But yeah, this ensures that there's only one, and not that crappy second Highlander movie. But it says, okay, this is the instance. And once I have that instance here, I can say, hey, let's add it to my relative heading. Basically, when I get updated, I tell my manager, hey, I've been updated, and it will run through all of the headings. Let's see here. It will update all of the headings to be able to make sure they're updated by ID and make sure they're, updated with what their parents have. And that's one pattern that I'm using for the headings. It's also doing this really crazy thing that there's a non-light option that you see these little links. It also manages this toast so that you can have links to headings in the full version. But it's one of the ways that I've used a singleton. The other way that I've used a singleton is in the video player. And if I play one video, chances are I probably don't, well, number one, if I scroll away from it, I like to be able to see it. But if I start playing this other video, I don't want like this wall of sound coming at me. So it's able to manage which video is playing so that there's only one playing. So I have a singleton that makes sure that video playing is in itself a singleton. And so I'm using, again, that singleton state manager pattern, this whole request availability and whatnot. This time, when I built this one, the way I did it was it's actually listening for a player being loaded. So I was debugging this. So it's basically adding a player when this player loader event comes up. So it's listening on the window for the alley player to say, hey, I'm here, and adds it to the list of players. If it's playing, it's going to check, it's going to run the sticky manager, and the sticky manager is just checking the scroll of the window to decide if this is within, if it's on screen or if it needs to jump into the little sticky corner. It will also check for a player to make sure it's, is it the active player, and turn everything else off. But that way it's all managed from one thing. I could have done the sticky piece on the individual video player, but then if I had multiple videos playing, I'd have a bunch of sticky videos. And if I'm watching the scroll all the time by all the players, that's a bunch of different scrolls I'm watching, when I could just do it once from a manager for all the players, if that makes sense.
It's really cool with the video player moving up there. Is that copying it to a different element, or is it when it puts it up there, or is it just restyling the existing element?
It's restyling the existing one.
Cool.
Just, absolute positioning and all of that.
Yeah, awesome.
Thanks.
Does this use the new picture-in-picture standard at all?
No, it does not. But that would be good to play around with.
And then the other question, a standards-related question: how does the are you using closest as a CSS selector to figure out the logic of where you are in the relative heading?
For the relative headings, what I'm doing to figure out where I am is I have that the ID of my parent, and that's how I track, how these are embedded. And then that manager is keeping track of the relationships between these different things. And if the parent goes away, it signals to them, or if the parent changes, it will signal to all of the children to update. And it's doing it in Light DOM so that you still have your headings. It's grabbing the heading out of Light DOM, updating it, and dropping it back in.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, my first thought on that too was I wasn't sure, like, is that a CSS selector that is like H1 with if everything was just a relative heading, you could just figure out the nesting and then be like, okay, if it's 2 levels deep, then it's an H3, but versus the siblings.
Yeah, I've thought about the idea of nesting things within things, but when I think about block editing and chunked content, you might pull something out of context, and I don't know, it just felt like a lot of nested divs. And this way we could apply the stuff that we saw with HAX last week with the outline schema. You could stop thinking about content as where it is on the page and think about these content blocks of where they live in the outline. And I think that, like, combined with this, you could really do some amazing stuff. Like, I want to pull the entire course out and turn it into an ebook, or I want to just pull out a single lesson, or I want to view it by page, or I just want to view one learning object that I'm embedding within Canvas.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of that block concept where the styling all looks, in H1, you have your title and your body and your picture and everything just looks the same. And then when you put it into a bigger story, then it melds into it as it should.
And I think that the one big challenge is this whole idea of, and I've been in enough, done enough template archaeology to see that we're sometimes guessing what those headings are supposed to be when we're trying to treat this as blocks. And really, I would love to be able to just treat content with a heading as a block.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've run into that same problem, and I was wondering if people solve this yet. This is like both of these have done this, because like yesterday I was looking for last week I was looking for the markdown thing, and now this is the headings, relative headings. So nice work. This is awesome.
The markdown thing. Nikki, do you think you could just explain what this weird cores issue we've been having with the video player is? Because anyone that does anything with video and web components could potentially run into this.
Oh, geez. Well, I mean, we had the one cores issue because of how things were being dropped back in. I'm trying to think what all was involved in that.
So for context, the video player, as Nikki has it, has a like progressive enhancement methodology. So you actually write a video tag inside your video player, and so that way, if you're on like, I don't know, it's going to be older versions of anything, but for SEO, that's an easy one, right? SEO, it's going to actually see the video tag and know what the source is, kind of a thing. But what we were running into is when we go out into production on that site that I showed earlier.
Oh yeah, the video. We had a specific video tag that wraps around Alley Player, and it was slotting its own video player inside of it, and so then it would take that and pull that slotted one, and instead of just dropping it in the Alley slot, it would make a new version and pull all those sources out. And so it was just kind of getting bounced from player to player.
So we threw our videos get delivered from another domain, as do our transcripts. Now the videos were fine, but for whatever reason with timing and transcripts, if that video tag is not in the DOM with the cores settings set ahead of time, it just gets PO'd. And so we'd actually get the video to play, but the transcripts would freak out. Yeah, the cores would be set after the fact, and probably by, like 1 millisecond. And that was enough for it to just be like, bah, I already bombed on this. I don't want your transcript anymore.
Yeah, so yeah, we were driving ourselves crazy with the fact that we couldn't find that. And it really did have to do with when we added the progressive enhancement, what was going on. And once we wrapped it within video player.
Did you solve that cores problem in the components, or did you have to do it on the server that was deploying the transcripts?
It was solved on the server. It was a matter of the cores setting on the component that wrapped my Alley media player wasn't applying to the slotted video in time.
Yeah, it has to be there before it gets a source or track data. So if it's not there prior to that track showing up, which is what was happening, because hey, I'd write it into the page, and so I'd output it from a Drupal template. It would just write the track into the page with her track associated, but the cores setting gets loaded ever so slightly after that initial paint. And so actually I think the progressive enhancement we were trying to do was actually part of the problem, because by having that in there, the DOM starts to pick it up and read it and go, oh, here's what the rules of the road are, versus if we had injected one with cross origin set via a property, it wouldn't have been an issue, because we would have teed up the whole video tag and then appended it. So figured mentioned in part because Nikki makes mistakes, as do I, but that cores is evil.
Race conditions are evil.
And race conditions are evil, and we still run into them quite frequently. Anybody have anything else they'd like to talk about? Any pressing topics? Anything they want to show? Is anyone doing anything? And I say this because Aiden and Jonathan and Cassandra are here, so I know they're outside of my normal circle here. Is anyone doing anything with lit element? Well, Cassandra, you're out there. Anyone doing anything with lit element and virtual lists? I am still looking for an infinite scroller virtual list solution from lit element. Now in Polymer land, there's Iron List or Vadden Grid, which are just phenomenal for this use case. I'm trying to think if there's a site I can go to and no, I can't go to any sites and show a infinite scrolling list for legal reasons. Because usually when I use them, it's to load like a lot of student work or like grades, right? So, but just the idea is that it's you're taking 1,000 records or whatever, but in the DOM, you're virtually only visualizing like 20. And then as you scroll, it's just flicking that part of the DOM. Does anybody have a lit element solution for that?
I have a cheating way, if that counts,
Okay.
where I wrapped a lit element that had a React virtual list inside of it.
Not the solution I was looking for. Although I do suppose that would work.
And just for context, so some of the way we deal with things is we have web components, and then you can kind of choose your underlying framework. So we use web components as our base, but then the components themselves can be whatever they need to be. So if someone has an Angular thing, the vessel is the web component. So that way they can ship whatever they want underneath the hood.
So this is the only solution that I've sort of seen so far. I was just hoping anybody had used this or anything else. But unfortunately, it's in Polymer Labs still, so it's lit virtualizer. And to inspect, so you can actually see what it does. Let's do a basic example. So what's happening is there's a ton of paragraphs in here, even though you're only seeing to about there. And then as I scroll, you'll see it's gonna replace some of the top ones. So it's basically manipulating the DOM in real time and tricking me into thinking I'm seeing it. And it's obviously incredibly fast, right? I mean, you know, I'm scrolling through this, it's at least 1,000 paragraphs of data or something loaded into an array. That is one of the biggest stumbling blocks I have in getting fully off of Polymer is we still have a lot of elements that we wrap things that ultimately is like this list. I did make a list though that I wanted to show Chuck now that I'm thinking about it. What is the name of that? Nikki, didn't we come up with a name that was like simple? Remember I asked about a list or pages. That's it, simple pages. Okay.
Yeah, Weezer.
So I had this idea that I wanted to get some feedback on. It's called Simple Pages. So what we're trying to solve is in the ODL site, I'll load it up here and it's gonna take a bit to load. So they're using an element that ultimately boils down to iron pages. So iron pages is this nice convention from Polymer land where basically you can flip between these elements and it's gonna make them visible. Now it's nice in the end, right? It jumps between these. And you can see it's picking what's iron selected and what's visible as a result of it. And it does some decent little state management stuff like bubble up an event to say what's active. You can set buttons that peg to it. I can't remember what those are in the top menu. I think there might be an event or something. But anyway, so the idea is you have something trigger this to say, hey, you're on the page 4 type of a deal. Now from a performance perspective though, you see all of these definitions on Hinge here. So every one of these web components is loaded into the DOM, you're just not seeing it. Also the definition is there, which I'm trying to get away from. So what I've been working on, sort of in the virtualizer universe, but not, is, let's do yarn start on this. It's this thing called Simple Pages. Now at the moment, it wraps iron pages as a bridge until I can get off of it, basically. But I think I have to actually go to, there we go. Okay, so I'll have to inspect the DOM because I have kind of a silly use case here in the demo. But so the idea is, come on, fragment, there we go. So you see here, Simple Pages has in it a Wikipedia query tag, a div, a paragraph, a meme maker, and a grid plate. Now, the reason I inspect this at first is you see Wikipedia query is not defined. So meme maker and grid plate are based on what's in the demo. I'll look at the little demo here under index. You see that I'm actually pulling in meme maker and grid plate, I think, is in something else. But so I'm gonna get rid of meme maker from our little demo. And so refresh this. I should see that meme maker's definition is not there. I just want to verify it's not caching. No, of course it's caching. But what I'm trying to come up with a standard way to do is this piece. So Wikipedia query is not selected, right? And it says selected as 0. I want to be able to, you know, is this error you were getting the other day, Nikki? Where it's not importing the stuff that you ask it to? What the hell?
That's not quite the error I was getting.
I'm gonna just fake it so that it'll let my thing load, I think.
I'm glad it's not just me that runs into this shit.
I haven't had that happen in a while, but yeah, I mean, it does happen occasionally.
So you're essentially trying to lazy load the components?
I am trying to lazy load the components as they become selected, yes. So the way I'm thinking of handling it, because the issue is that you don't know where that thing lives, because I heavily leverage dynamic imports because we ship things unbundled. So when I hit next, it's basically just toggling through selected and just showcasing what the thing is. But what I'm trying to accomplish with it is that you would say, okay, well, this is a meme maker, and anything that has a data-dimport, it's going to leverage that path to do the dynamic import if it doesn't already have the component defined.
Ah, yeah.
So there it is. So, and then in this case, it also fires off a resize event because heaven forbid we load anything that is caring about its size, like Nikki's grid plate tag, because the grid plate was then real small and squishy. So I'm just wondering, does that seem like it makes sense? Is there anything else anybody's ever done in this area? As you see in the actual HTML of my element, it's literally just iron pages slotting the tags in until we come up with a replacement for it. You know, I was hoping lit virtualizer or some variation thereof, but.
Yeah, I do something similar to that as well. Mine are unfortunately a little bit more, like all my components are all in the same tree. So when I pull them in, it's essentially a variation of a page name. And then based on that, I go find that component that references that page name. So I am doing almost the exact same thing, but without declaring it as part of the element.
Yeah, I don't know if that's something maybe we could have a singleton pattern for, Nikki. Maybe like we have a registry of things that can then register and say, these are things that can be, here's where these definitions live. I would just hate to bloat up the DOM even by having some fictional data import thing laying around. And it also is, it's sort of a problem use case we have in HAX as well, where tags get imported and they need to know where the hell the definition is for them so they can be dynamically loaded. HAX CMS also has a similar paradigm. The content gets dumped in. It's a mutation observer that notices, says, hey, do I know what all these tags are? Oh, I don't know what this tag is, and then checks against a registry. And we don't have a standard place that registry lives. Maybe we should think about one. I don't know.
Are you concerned that the registry itself would be too big for the DOM?
No, just that we have it in one place, because that feels like a state management thing that could potentially happen.
Yeah, but you said that you were concerned that something would take up too much space in the DOM.
Oh, sorry. I just meant like room for error. So like if Chuck were to implement this, you know, in one element, like he puts it in the theme, he's going to need to know the paths to every single one of those. Okay, right, now we go to some other thing and we need to know the path. Like, I don't like writing paths to things, even if they are bare imports in this case. So I don't know if maybe there's some registry we can have, and then maybe I have Simple Pages do a mutation observer and just do the same thing that HAX CMS does. I don't know.
It sounds like you don't want to replace the component names, because if you ever move them around in the tree, then all your components are broken.
That too.
Yeah, that one have to think about a little bit. Yeah, it works when you control everything, but yeah, when they come in out of the wild and out of the blue, then moving stuff when you don't control it makes it a little bit more problematic. And since at that point they're technically going to be fuzzy strings, unless you have another file somewhere that controls all those string definitions. That way you can keep them the same, but then have just one JavaScript object that essentially controls all of your component strings.
By fuzzy strings, you mean like because of the build routine that's going to smash them into something else?
Oh, I guess if that's, so I saw it like in the rendered there, you literally had the namespace path to the file. I was assuming that when you literally wrote it in there, you were referencing that somewhere. But I guess, yeah, technically, if you're doing that part as a build step, then that's a little less bad.
Yeah, so the build, well, yeah, and then that becomes another thing. Like if this has dynamic imports in it, build steps would not be able to process it in the same way. Now, I'm a firm believer in keeping these things unbundled until I see something that actually shows me not to do that. Just because I think long-term sticking as close to the import standard and HTTP2 and us throwing these things on CDNs, that's going to position us for whatever it is we're positioning that type of information for. But other than cache expiration, so maybe next time we can talk about cache expiration, Mike, because we have no idea how to do cache expiration correctly. But anyway, we're at 5:03 Eastern Standard Time. So with that, Tom, you want to cut the recording? I'll say thank you all for jumping in and contributing. This was a great discussion. Tom's going to cut these up and we'll dump them on the Elms ON YouTube channel, and we'll just keep loading it up with these every week. This is fun.